Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Thanks to all of you for your emails, your text messages. Our numbers are going up and up and up very quickly. We just posted our 100th episode a few episodes back, so we're proud of that. Especially when I thought that I wasn't going to be doing this thing for more than probably a year. I thought the fad would pass and I'd move on to something else. And here I am 3 years later still doing this thing. The other thing is we also surpassed 10,000 downloads a few days ago. And that is also moving. We're actually at 12,000, now. And so the popularity and influence of the show continues to grow, and I'm proud about that. And primarily it continues to grow because I continue to have great guests like my friend today. We're thrilled to have a visionary leader and social innovator who has made profound impact on the lives of Black men and boys, Mr. Brandon Frame. I think he got docked on the front. We'll explore that when he gets on. But Brandon is the Chief Visionary Officer of the TheBlackManCan Foundation, an award-winning and internationally recognized nonprofit and digital media platform dedicated to celebrating, educating, and inspiring boys and men of color. Through TheBlackManCan, Brandon has worked tirelessly to challenge stereotypes and amplify the authentic stories of Black men, creating a powerful shift in the perception and empowering individuals to redefine their narratives. In addition to his work with TheBlackManCan, Brandon serves as the Deputy Director of Social Emotional Learning at the Urban Assembly, where he helps integrate crucial life skills into education for young people. He is also the co-founder of the award-winning Twitter chat Hip Hope and the author of Define Yourself, Redefine the World, a guided journal for boys and men of color, and his children's book, My First Tie. Brandon's dedication to uplifting his community has earned him numerous accolades, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major Award and the title of Changemaker of the Year. Despite these achievements, what stands out most in his and his commitment to servant leadership, always striving to make a positive difference in the lives of others. So let's welcome my good friend, Brandon Frame, to the stage. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, man. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
So happy to have you here. Not sure if you've heard the podcast, but we start our podcast with a nice little icebreaker. It tends to set the tone for the show. And we start off by asking our guests to tell their daddy story. Frame it however you want, from wherever you want, however you want to position it. It's your daddy story.
Wow. This is a first as a question. My daddy story. I feel like it's slightly twofold, right? One is I have a really great relationship with my dad. Simultaneously, I didn't meet my dad till I was 18. And so we have a really great relationship now. We're season ticket holders to the Dallas Cowboys.
That ain't much to be proud of, sir. Let me tell you, as a Giant fan. So, but go on, continue.
And I was in his wedding. We chat, we talk, and we built this really great relationship. Now for the other 18 years, because I'm 36 now. So for half my life, I didn't know him, and then the other half I've been able to build a relationship with him. So I think that's really interesting when I think about my daddy story. And it's just been a joyous opportunity to build and meet my siblings and meet the rest of the side of my family, but ultimately just build a relationship with him. Yeah, that's how I look at it. When I say it's twofold, simultaneously, because I'm not a dad yet, but I aspire to be one. I look forward to getting married and having children and being that dad and doing all the amazing things that I see my peers and my friends do with their kids. I see the blessings and happiness and joy and favor that comes into their life because of the children that they brought into the world. And I look forward to experiencing that as well.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. The second thing that I like to do and take a little walk down, because I think it's important for people to kind of know how we get to our calling, how we get to our purpose. Because I have a lot of people who always ask me, Mr. Braswell, how did you define your purpose? How did you know when your purpose became your purpose? When you think about the vision that you had to create the Black Man Can, what was the journey that brought you to that point?
Yeah, and I think part of it is my actual life journey. One is growing up, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And based off my age, at that point, now a lot of athletes become sports broadcasters after they finish. There's a lot of Black men in sports broadcasting specifically, where growing up, it was just Ahmad Rashad and Stuart Scott. That was it, and a few others, right? And so as I got older, I aspired to do these things, and then going to Morehouse and meeting my fellow brothers and hearing their dreams and their goals, but then also spending time from Hartford to East Atlanta and meeting young men who they're not necessarily thinking about all the amazing things that they can accomplish and do in the world. And so one of my quotes that I live by is, once you make an observation, you have an obligation. So I made an observation through my life experiences that Black men and boys need to see positive images of themselves and have their stories told. So therefore I had an obligation to create it. And that was in April of 2010. And over the last 14 years, we've been able to promote a positive Black male image, being able to tell the stories, create programming, amplify content that celebrates and shows who we are, how we show up in the world, and all the impact that we're making.
Yeah. Throughout our history, I get a lot of, with my work from folks, and I'm sure you get it periodically too, other men are having problems too. Why don't you work with other men? And why don't you expand and broaden in your scope to work with all men? And my response to that is always, listen, my calling is my calling. If you want to do something different, then by all means, start your not-for-profit, open it up and talk to whoever you want to talk to. But my purpose and my calling from God is to focus specifically on Black men. Now I have the opportunity and position to be able to speak in a broader space and other elements of my life and other elements of my organization, but I think it is important to focus, on that which we know best, right? I always tell people the two undeniable aspects of my resume is that I've been a Black man all my life and been a father most of my life. And so I could talk about those two things from a perspective that most people can't. When you think about the work that you're doing specifically with Black men, from my generation and even up until today, I still feel an urgency to do this work. Do you feel that urgency as well, and why?
Oh, I absolutely feel the urgency. One is because I spend so much time with with my peers who are the same age. Also have mentees who are in the next decade below me, right? And they're in their 20s, right? But also still spending time with young boys in high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. And you see, and also spending time with my mentors who are older than me, right? And you see the needle that you can thread through, and why we have to keep the urgency going to continue to build and grow, because that intergenerational mantle passing is so important and so essential. There's so much that my mentor and those above him know, right? And they've been passing it down to me, and then I got to keep passing it down, because if it took my mentor 20 steps, it's got to take me 10. That means the next generation after me got to take them 5, right? We do this workshop where it's kind of like it's called the maturation of Jay-Z, right? And it's like, if you listen to Jay-Z at the album 444, and then you listen to Jay-Z Reasonable Doubt, that's almost like a 20-year span, but it's almost listening to like 2 different individuals, right? And so I sit and think about, and we go through this process of, what does it look like if young boys can be at Jay-Z's level at 444 at the age he was when he did Reasonable Doubt.
Wow.
Right? And when we think about that, now you're like, okay, now you're creating comprehensive men who are able to lead in business, lead their families, lead communities, lead society, lead themselves, right? So I think I have the sense of urgency to continue to go, as well as even we have our programs in regular K through 12 settings, but we also have programs in juvenile justice, right? And so I've been into different juvenile facilities, and so you get to see both sides, right? I've sat with gifted kids who we consider gifted and talented, and it's not to say the boys in juvenile justice are not; they've made different decisions. But I've met with super smart young men who are incarcerated at 17 and 16 for different decisions, and you start to see the gaps where everybody needs support and help. And so that's why the urgency is still there, because we need to equip all our men, boys who are going to be grown into men, into the comprehensive men that we need for society.
When you talk about those two segments of boys and men in some cases, where we are also in Fulton County jail, and we are in other jails doing our platforms here in Atlanta. I often think about the theming message that crosses both our dads that we are working with, on the outside of incarcerated situations and those that are on the inside. And there's always a theming message, right? Because we can often think that we got to say something different to both of them, right? And most of what we talk about is the same theming. When you think about those two segments of boys that you're talking about, what's the theming message? That it really doesn't matter what their situation is, it's still something that they need to know.
We really hyper focus on skills, and really my area for research and my work and my doctorate in education, but specifically focused on social emotional learning. And so we really talk about this intentional and explicit development of social emotional skills, and really threading that through. Even when we bring men together, we're having moments to talk about these social emotional skills. Where are we, right? Because if we were to assess in these different areas, that's where it usually starts to fall off, where things don't work out, right? Whether it's in business or in your relationship, your leadership matters, and your leadership is tied to how strong your social emotional skills are. And so really working with young men, working with grown men around where are you with your self-awareness, your self-management, social awareness, social management. But we dig even deeper and look at empathy, compassion, vulnerability. These are skills. We don't think of them as just arbitrary things that we kind of talk about. You got to be vulnerable. Like, no, like what does it look like to develop vulnerability, and how would you deploy that into the world in work and at home, right? If you have to have empathy and compassion. A lot of times I will talk with men, and this is one reason why thinking about these skills, sometimes we have these conversations with grown men, and it's not until they have daughters that they think of women and see women differently. And I think that's slightly problematic, right? So let's just say you don't have a daughter until you're 30 or 35. So for the first 30-something years of your life, you looked at women a certain way and processed women a certain way, and then you had a daughter, and you're like, oh man, I gotta do different. I can't do the same thing. I can't talk to her the same way. That we need to have that same process all the way through. So even when we're working with our young boys, we'll have moments where we do events called Her Story. So we'll bring women in of all different ages to share their stories. And so it's just twofold. One is for boys to hear these stories and hear things that women are thinking about, and get a chance to ask them questions that they always wanted to ask. And like, it's really funny because like middle schoolers will ask like, how do you ask a girl to dance? Like that, up to, older boys saying like, well, I want to ask this girl on a date. How should I do that? Right. But simultaneously, it's even preparing the young boys, knowing that like the young ladies that they're in class with, they're going to end up being these grown women when they go older. They're going to be professionals. They're going to be CEOs. They're going to be president of the United States of America. Right.
Right.
And you have to see girls even in sixth grade that way. Right. And think about how we develop our boys and our men in that way, so that we can create wonderful communities and families in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talked about Jay-Z. You talked about that recognition that happens when you have children, and more specifically girls. I remember, and I've often talked about this when he did it, I remember when Blue Ivy was born. Jay-Z was being interviewed by somebody, and he said, man, I got this little girl in front of me, now I understand I'll never call, a woman the B word again. Like, he made that declaration when his daughter was born. And when I heard it, I thought it was a beautiful thing, but then I had a question when he said it, which is, why didn't you recognize that when you married your wife? And so there is a transformational wisdom click that happens when you have your own children that makes you begin to think about life in a very different way. When you think about your upbringing and you think about the methods that was used to make you the man that you are today, do you think those same methods work for our young boys today?
That's an amazing question, right? So there's some multiple things here that I think about. One, I'm going to say yes. I think that kids are still, like, when you spend time with kids, when you spend time with a 5-year-old, even a 12-year-old, they do 5-year-old and 12-year-old things, right? Like, even a kid that you're like, oh, you can tell they like an old soul, but they still kids. Like, they still do kid. Like, there's no parent who's going to be like, yeah, I got an 11-year-old. He be acting 20, or he feel he's an adult, but like he does 11-year-old things, right? And so I think sometimes we have to think about the digital aspect though, and like, how do we truly limit screen time? Like, I know for a fact that parents will use technology as a babysitter, right? And that's not something that I got to experience. Really, there was no technology my mom was really going to give me that would, other than maybe Game Boy, right? But it still wasn't like what it is. What we have now is not what we had growing up. So I think about, what does that look like to really spend time with your kids and make sure they're outside playing and socializing and developing in that way. So I think that that's something that's really important. This is so interesting because I'm 36, but I have a 15-year-old sister. And so I had this conversation with my mom, because my mom is definitely, I'm like, I couldn't do half the things that my little sister does, right? But my mom has also been raising kids. I told her she needed to write a book, but she's been raising kids under the age of 18 since 1987. Like, she's the youngest, I'm the oldest, and there's 3 in between, right? And so, like, most people haven't been raising kids for 5 decades, like under the age of 18 for 5 straight decades, right? Or 4 straight decades. So I think that simultaneously, though, what I'm seeing and what's interesting about this is that I grew up in very humble beginnings. And so, like, even my little sister gets to live a little bit of a different life than what I experienced growing up. But watching my friends, who we all grew up maybe in an urban environment, in a working class, or we was on Section 8, all that, right? But everybody went to college, has these degrees, bought these homes, and now they're having kids. And they're like, I call it building resilience without trauma. And I've been having this conversation to your question, is what does it look like to build resilience without trauma? Because so many of us grew up in, whether it's Brooklyn, New York, or the Bronx, Hartford, Connecticut, Compton, California, and now we live in the suburbs and we have beautiful homes. And we know that while there was trauma in the communities we grew up in, some of that trauma is why we're successful now. It's why we've been able to push through. What does it look like when your kids will never know any of that? And developing them into the adults that you need them to be without any of the negative things that may happen in life, or the trauma that happens in certain communities and things you see. And so I think there's so to the question, right? One of my friends, when we talked about this, he said he lives in Westchester County, right? But he's from Brooklyn, and his son, he brings his son into the Bronx and to Brooklyn to play basketball, because he might be killing all Westchester County, but like, listen, we're gonna take you in, so you see what time it is, you know what I'm saying? So you get right. And then he talked about how his son was struggling a little bit between seeing certain behaviors and certain things that you might see in the city, and that's not what you see in Westchester County, especially if he's like one of the few Black kids. And so he was going through this identity piece of like what it means to be Black and whatnot. And then he has these conversations with his son about, you're in it, but you're not of it. And I thought that was like really powerful to your question, like, what does it look like is like, there's that piece too, right? Once you move out and you move up, and then how do you make sure that your son or your daughter is developing the skills necessary to be successful? But he had this whole conversation around, you're not in it, but they're not in it. You're not of it, but you're in it, but not of it, right? And what that means, and having that conversation, and not to look down on anybody, but at the same time, like, you do grow up this way. This living in an upper middle class Black household, going skiing and everything is also normal. That's what we do. That is what Black people do, right? And so I think, this is unique to being a Black dad, and how you develop that in your kids, especially if you didn't come from that space growing up. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I look forward to embarking upon that journey myself, because I know that how I grew up is not how my kids are going to grow up.
Yeah, but I'm such a literal person these days, right? Because I think that it's extremely important that we give definition to words so that everybody is on the same page when we talk about a particular subject matter, and I feel, that conversation about, trying to expose your child to something that was good for you, and you think because it was good for you it's going to be good for them, but when you say that you're in it but you're not of it, it's difficult in my mind because our environment is part of our being. If you're in it, you're always going to be of it, even if you're in a small piece of it, right? And so, because you can't have a portion of our culture without having the whole culture, right? And so, if you want to, you said earlier, so in my house, I have a 15 and a 17-year-old. My son, my youngest son, my only boy, and my nephew, who I brought from New York 3 years ago to live with us to, get his life right and get him on the right path. And, there are these times in the house where, I'm in the office working, and like in the week, they can't be on 2K, PS5. They can't be on PS, throughout the week. You either reading, you studying, you're interacting, you're in the driveway shooting the ball, you doing something, but you're not, locked behind, your PlayStation. And during the week I could be in the office working, and like 5, 6, 7 o'clock, when they've done what they're doing, like they're banging around, right? I hear the basketball up against the wall. I hear them banging up against the wall. I hear them things knocking, things falling down. And it's like, my mind is like, I want to yell and say, yo, what are y'all doing in there? Stop, sit down somewhere, like be quiet, blah, blah, blah. And then I get to what you said earlier, which is, it's a 15 and a 17-year-old boy in a house that can't play their PlayStation. What do you expect them to do? They're not going to sit there for like hours on end and not do anything. And so I think that, when it comes to our youth today, I think one of the things that we need to do, and I want you to respond, to this, is we really have to take into consideration the generational differences between us and our children. Like, our generations are changing rapidly now. It's almost like I liken it to music, right? Like, we went from, it took a long time to get from 8-track or eight album to 8-track, and then 8-track to cassette. But it was like light speed when we moved from cassette to CD to MP3 to now it's just virtual in the air. There's no tangible. When you have music, it's not tangible. You don't go anywhere to buy it. You just get it online. That happened really, really fast. And I think the same thing is happening with our children in their generations, because society is moving so fast. They're moving and adapting to environment. And part of what we're having struggle with, particularly in my generation, with trying to figure out how to influence and how to help and how to give some measure of wisdom to children, is that they're on a totally different frequency. Do you see that when you're dealing with your young people, that they're just on a total different wavelength?
Absolutely. I mean, you absolutely see that. And when you start getting into Gen Z, and I think my sister is a part of Gen Alpha, I think that's the name of like her generation, like totally on a different wavelength. Still 15-year-olds though.
Right.
Like still thinking like 15-year-olds and doing 15-year-old things, but simultaneously on another wavelength because of the access to technology and information that they have that we didn't have. Like we both can remember learning the Dewey Decimal System. My sister would ask me, "What is that?" Right? So yes. So I think there's when you sit with Gen Z and you sit with Gen Alpha, I think that's something that we just have to do. We have to create more opportunities for dialogue because the shift has happened so quickly that both parties need to be updated on what is going on and how they're thinking and how they see the world, and then that allows for us to come together to create the compacts, the documents that are like, okay, this is how we can move together. Because like I wasn't aware of these things, like even just how words change and like using acronyms for words that we used to spell out. I mean, these things are very real that cause I don't want to say divisiveness. It causes separation, right? And what we really need to do is see how we can work together, because there's so many things that they do know how to do. We've all, even me at 36, I've talked to my sister a few things. She's like, "Oh, you just gotta do that," like with something with the phone or whatever. "Oh, just do that," and I'm like, "What?" Like, And so there's an opportunity for us to build, because even though it's that same Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they want to be great, right? I've personally never met a human being in the world who didn't want to get educated on something, right? And so there are people who have done so much and want to pass that information down. And so how do we create opportunities to share that information?
How is the journal that you wrote, Define Yourself, Redefine the World, a guided journal for boys and girls of color, how is that helping in your work, and why is it important to journal?
So it's going well. We're actually in the process of making another one, just because that one came out in 2013, right? So like something that you created in 2013 and 2014 is pretty much obsolete, right? In some ways, right? So we're working on another one, but still getting young men to write, because one, when you put it down on paper, I think it's so interesting. When you put something down on paper, you remember it more. I'm really working with young people on that, right? Because they'll take a picture of something. That picture not making it out your phone. You're gonna forget about it. But when you write it down, when you read stuff and you write stuff down, you internalize it, you remember it. And so that's one reason why journaling is good, as well as when it comes to, when we're talking about written reflection and we're talking about our emotions and social emotional skill development. Sometimes you have to write how you're thinking and feeling in that moment so you can go back to it and be able to decipher through how you're feeling and what actions are you going to take to move forward and what are areas that you need to improve upon.
Yeah, my nephew is interesting because last night I was doing some cleaning, after the last few months of planning these events that we had. And as I was cleaning, going through some papers, I ran across a note, a paper that I had my nephew write after having something. I don't even remember what it was, but whatever it was, I remember having a conversation with him about integrity and responsibility. And my thing with him was, you know what? Here's how we're going to continue this conversation. I need for you to go, and however you find information, I need for you to write me a one-page explanation of how you understand integrity and responsibility. And I was sitting there last night and I started reading this thing, Brandon, and just started crying, just listening to how he was describing it and how he understood it. He probably don't even remember he wrote that thing, but I was sitting there reading it because in my mind I was like, one day I'm going to give this back to him and say, listen, you do understand, what it means to have a level of integrity and to be responsible, even though you're a 17-year-old kid and you act irresponsibly all the time, right? It's the reason why he wants to drive. And I'm like, dude, I can't trust you in the house. I definitely not going to trust you in the car driving around, in public. So those two things got to sync up, for me. But I think part of that teaching for our young people now has to include this whole measure of social emotional learning, which is something that you're doing at the Urban Assembly. Talk about the importance of really honing in on making sure that our youth understand the importance of their emotions.
Oh, I mean, it is the linchpin. It is the key to their success. Is that if you think about, even with your organization, when you interview somebody, you don't ask them about the Pythagorean theorem. You assume that they can read, and you assume that they can do arithmetic. Like, it's almost like that's a given. You ask them about, can you collaborate effectively with other people? How are your interpersonal skills? Like, you think about the questions you ask, it is all tied to social emotional skills. However, in our schools currently, that's not necessarily what's prioritized, right? You can go to a school, we can go to schools right now, and if we ask a young person how you're doing academically, what are your strengths, challenges, and needs? And we ask a kid who went to school 50% of the time or 100% of the time, they're going to give you a response to give you some sort of articulation of what and how they're doing academically, what are their strengths, challenges. If you ask that same kid, any kid, how are you doing with your social emotional skills? What are your strengths, challenges, and needs? They might not be able to answer that question. And they probably are definitely not answering it as strong as they answer the academic side. But we know that in life, you need to be able to answer that and know that, number one, is for jobs, let
Right.
alone what that looks like at home for yourself and in relationships. And so by prioritizing that, it equips boys and men and people to be prepared for life and the jobs that don't exist. Because even the jobs that don't exist, the number one thing they're going to start asking you is, well, how are your social emotional skills, right? For the jobs that do not exist right now, there are jobs that do not exist today that will be jobs in 5 years. They're going to be asking, how are you with your social emotional skills? And so by doing that, we're already preparing kids for the future, not just to be that. And then you think about men and boys becoming men and having a strong sense of their emotions and who they are and being able to communicate that to their partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like almost every woman has a story of dealing with a man,
Mm-hmm.
and it was his social emotional skills that weren't necessarily that strong, and it was crazy, right? Like, men also can have that. Men can have that same story about women, but sometimes it's every woman has that story about a man,
Absolutely.
right? And so, what does it look like when that's no longer the case?
Right.
And what type of communities do we have? Like, I have a book that I'm working on. It's called SCL Nation. It's getting published through Guilford Press, and that's what it's all about. It's all about this idea of what does the country, what the United States look like when everybody has strong social emotional learning skills, right?
Mm.
What happens when every single young person graduates from high school with a solid foundation of social emotional skills alongside their academic skills? That means they kind of, when the light bulb, because everybody's light bulb comes on at a different time of what they want to do, what their purpose is. It does not happen for everybody at 15 or 16. It can happen at 35. But even no matter what point that light bulb comes on and you want to push forward with it, if you're equipped with those skills academically and social emotionally, you can realize that potential into reality.
Yeah, I'm actually working on three and a half books, right? I'm writing like the three of them at the same time because I got all this stuff up here that I'm trying to get out on paper so that I can begin to start talking more about it. But there's this other one that I'm tinkering with, and I'm not sure whether or not I want it to be an actual book or just a training or speaking tour subject matter or whatever. But it's close to what you're talking about. But on the flip hand side, for practitioners that are working specifically with men and boys, and more specifically Black men and boys, and the theming of it is that empathy should be a core responsibility of providing services for men. And I think that if you are a practitioner or anybody and you don't have a level of empathy for men and boys, particularly Black men and boys, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to do this work. As you are doing the work And I love that you are a producer, because I think that one of the best things we can do as leaders in our community is document what we're thinking, document what we're trying to implement, and document what we're seeing. Why is it important to do what you're doing in terms of creating product that supports the work that you're trying to accomplish?
Because I think that allows for it to scale, and it gives people resources. Everybody's not about to sit and make the resources, the journals, the affirmation cards, the books. They want the program and they want to go buy the resources, but they want to buy the resources and people that look like them, that have had those experiences, and it's culturally relevant, and gender specific, gender and race specific. And so that allows for you to scale the impact, right? By creating those products, and people can adopt those measures. And then even, I know you go present at conferences all the time, and then they see your program and they're like, hey, I just need the blueprint. Like, right? And like, I don't want to rebuild the thing, because trying to rebuild it takes too much, something in time takes too much time. Like, the need is there. We have people who have created the solutions to the challenges that we face. We need to take some of those and then and employ them into other communities. And then we start, and then when everybody's doing that in their little corner of the world, we're making the world a better place, and we're making Black men and boys better.
Mm-hmm. Media is an important thing, for our culture. Has always been, whether it has been traditional media, meaning music, reading, arts and entertainment. And today's media now includes the whole element of social media, right? Social connection through platforms, through apps, through your phones, even through PlayStation, right? And because I can hear my kids in the room over the weekend playing Madden, and I hear 15 voices, because all of their friends are locked into the same social, network. How important is it to kind of lean on media today? Because one of the things, Brandon, I've been thinking about, um, specifically as it relates to music, because I don't listen to music as much as I used to, meaning new music, only because new music for me hasn't become relevant to monitoring for my children, right? That's why I mean, I'm a music head by what I like to do, right? And so, but there was a time where I had to pay attention to what was going on in music, because those things were influencing my children. And what I began to start thinking about was how every generation of our culture has had a music genre that spoke to their generation. And I often wonder whether or not the current body of music and entertainment and media is speaking to this generation.
I think that the music always is speaking to it, right? Like, you could say, and it's not to say that, so for example, I heard this once, and it's not to say that this is 100% true for all kids, but like, kind of like, at least when I listen to rap music, when I remember, so for me, in terms of rap music specifically, I'm 50 Cent, like 50 Cent's first album, Young Jeezy's first album, Dipset. That's like how I'm processing the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I probably looked at the culture, but I didn't sell drugs, but a lot of it was about selling drugs.
Mm.
When you go now, it's a lot about doing drugs, and
Mm.
it's not as much about selling drugs, right? Like, so I think the kids are trying these things. Like there's a song by Future, and I know it because I was singing it, and I remember when it wasn't the first. It was probably like, I don't know how long after I heard it that I realized what I was saying. But there's a song. He's like, Molly Percocet, right? Like, that's those are the lyrics.
Right. Yes.
Right. But kids are trying these things. Kids are doing the different drugs, and so sometimes I think it is a representation of what kids are living now, which is like to try different drugs, create these drinks, and actually do them. When, like, I'm not saying that people weren't doing drugs, since they were doing drugs, but I know a lot of people that really wanted to sell drugs because, like, that was part of like what the culture, some of the music promoted. If that's what popular hip hop promoted. And so I think it is a representation, because when you sit and talk with the boys, they are trying those things. They are trying to go to an altered state or another place by, medicating themselves on these different drugs. So I think, and then on top of that, when you listen to some of the rappers and this drill rap that is very popular now, and the things that they're talking about, or when you go into certain areas, like they're rapping about the same thing that they're seeing in their communities, just like NWA did when they came out with their stuff, and like we're rapping about what we see, right? We're rapping about the reality, or like I was in when I was working in the juvenile facility, and like a lot of the kids started trying to rap and stuff, and like when they rap, I was like, yo, do you think you can write? I asked them, like, could you write a positive rap about like upliftment or positivity? Like, and they're like, that's not my life. Right? So like, I don't know what you want me to, I don't know what I would rap about that I would say would be like, something that would be joyful or positive, like Lupe Fiasco type of, rapping and stuff like that. D1 is another one. It's like, I don't know how I would rap about stuff like that. So I think it is a reflection of their current realities. And then there's also, you can also create rap that depicts what you wish your reality was, which is like, I wish I kind of was in the street or in living that life, even though you don't even know what that really means. So I think that the music is, I think the music is a representation of what the kids, and that's where we do have to meet them at, right? We do have to take time. I listen to some of the artists and, create lessons in terms of social emotional learning. One of the things we like to do is called lyrical lessons. And like, let's actually like pull out what the artists are saying, and let's actually break it down. Because a lot of times it's a hot beat, right? The beat fire. The beat is always going to be fire. And then you say, and then sometimes, like I said, I'm Molly Percocet, but like you don't even realize. And I'm like, it's happened to me, so I know it's happening to them at 15 and 16. You just, you know the words because the beat is fire. Sometimes the rhymes are not as complex as they might have been, in past hip hop. You know what I mean? So it's easier to just know it off that beat and simple cadence. So what does it look like to break those lyrics down and talk about them, and what is this artist actually saying, and how do we tie that to like social emotional skill development? But that's just meeting the kids where they are and the things that they're listening to, and move them forward in that way.
Yeah. But you know what? It's always been part of the music genre. You've always had songs that you end up like singing in parties, and then you realize like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I never paid attention to this song because I was too busy dancing. I ain't really like pay attention to it. I think about, a Teddy Pendergrass song that was like, there's a line in there, you got what I want, you got what I need. And like, he's like yelling it, like really like hard. I was like, wait a minute, that's a little aggressive. Like when I'm thinking about it now, or you think about Rick James Super Freak, right? Somebody heard it the other day and I'm like, she's a freaky girl, the one you don't take home to mama. And I was like, wait a minute, like, okay, I don't know if I want to be playing this with my kids in the car, but at the same time, again, I'm listening to stuff, and, one of the Drake songs that I like is, oh my goodness, it's the one with him and DJ Khaled. Something about I shouldn't have to for free.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about, for free. I think that's the one. Interestingly enough, I think that's the one Kendrick Lamar is actually on. Is it that one?
Is it?
There's a song like they had their whole beef, but like they actually have songs together too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like it's so good. I shouldn't have to for free. And I'm like, that's. I'm listening to. I'm like, okay, it's not my reality, but to your point, it's their reality. And I think sometimes that's the miss as well, is that a lot of what 50 Cent talked about, a lot of what, Ice Cube, Snoop talked about was their own realities. And it was a little more relatable to their communities because they were a little more attached to their communities than our artists today. Drake and those guys are not really attached in the same way that those guys who still had houses in the hood their mom still had houses in the hood. They were still kind of grounded in a space where people could understand. But I think where the disconnect is where, to your point, where they're talking about things that they are being exposed to that's part of the reality of their lives, and that kids that aren't where they are believe that in order to get there, that I have to know about that or do that because that's part of the culture that I have to be amenable to. But I want to lean into, before we round this out in the next few minutes, your platform is a digital platform, which is very different. And I remember when you started the Black Man Can, I can vividly remember this surge in social media of platforms that were beginning to talk specifically to Black men. And I was like, do I really want to get in that space? And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay over here in this program space. But I love what they're doing. Is important that they do that to move the messaging, because I think that if we don't cultivate the messaging within social media from our own point of view, then others will spin that story in their own way. It's around the African proverb that says that as long as the hunter is writing a story, the lion story will never be told. It's also connected to AI, right? Part of what the problem with AI is that people of color, particularly Black people, are not using AI in a culturally responsive way, and training AI to think about Black people in the way that Black people think about Black people. And when you go into AI, you do things and you talk about Black people, you get some really weird things because we're not framing the conversation for Black people within AI. When you think about your social media platforms, do you think about the level of influence, like really, that you've had on this conversation of Black men over the last 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I do think about it. I think it's been interesting to know that we've been able to impact and shift narratives, inspire people, remind people like who Black men are, how we show up in the world. So I'm conscious of it. I do think about what I post and what I share. 'Cause I'm the one who posts like the whole time. There's never been anybody else who's ever posted on the Black Man Can. So that's me posting all the content, finding the content that I think represents us. I am simultaneously, I think that we have to continue, because I still go into meetings where trying to get people to buy into just telling stories about Black men and boys is, some people in the marketing space, the branding space, these companies would say, I don't see the ROI on investing in Black men, right? Simultaneously, even with that, even with what you've done and how you've impacted what I'm doing and many other Black men, it's still like, I don't know if there's, is there really a space to that if we go ahead and full head into this will give us a return on investment similar to what they may feel they get if they do the same thing for our sisters, right? And so I've been thinking about how to galvanize and cultivate and work together with men to show that this is what happens when you invest in Black men and boys, because a lot of times right now, if you look at most of the reports about us, they're all negative reports, right? They're like, oh, we can't read, we're not at home, we're not showing up as fathers, like we're unemployment, prison populations, right? And so right now we're in the process of developing something a report that we could put out that would be an asset-based report that shows what happens when you take time to actually truly invest in Black men and boys. And there's a sense of urgency to do so. I think it was either 2022 or 2023 was the first year where more women became master barbers than men. Right? Like and then you also see the most recent report around women. There are more women in vocational programs than there are men. Right? And this is a lot of work and investment that has happened over years to get to see that shift. And I think at one point it's like, oh, we just kind of want to get it to equal. Like now men are actually falling even way farther behind in all these different areas. And so what does it look like to really create support so that we can move men and boys forward? And the truth of the matter is it's happening across every ethnicity. Like it's not just it's not just black men. Like white women are outperforming in white men. Latinx women are outperforming their men, right? And it's like, what is it going to look like to really create, again, with our focus is black men and boys, but as just men as a whole too, so that we can be prepared for the future to be the leaders of our families and communities, societies, companies, and more.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, brother. I've been having some conversations with some people around the country. I've been kicking around an idea about doing a national conference on black men and fathers and boys, kind of bringing all three of those things together to bring those three spaces together. Because I think that right now there is a separation of those of us who are doing specifically fatherhood work with black men, those of us who are doing primarily work around black men, and then those who are doing work around black boys. And then those things are even becoming separated for organizations who may be doing things around mental health or maternal health care or economic stability. Like this too many silos that aren't connecting with each other for us to be able to frame the conversation you're talking about ROI. That's why it's difficult to tell that, because there's so much fractured infrastructure around black men from an organizational perspective. And then the other thing is identifying, like I had this conversation and someone said, wow, it seems like there are a lot of fatherhood organizations today. And I said, well, you have to frame what you mean when you say organization. I said, because anybody who obtains a 501c3 is technically and legally an organization. The question is whether or not they have the bandwidth, the scale, and the funding stability to be able to continuously do their work and be impactful in the area that they want to be impactful in. When you start to factor that in, organizations are a small few across the country who are able to do that and function, when people need them the most. And so I love the conversation, and I would love to continue to expand on this, with you, because I think there is a synergy between, several organizations that are doing this work at high levels across the country that might be able to make even greater strides if we found ways to pull ourselves together to put together a report as you're describing, to really talk about why this is important, so that it's not so hard for you to walk into an office and convince people, because now you can not only lean on your work, but you can lean on the work of the field and say, nah, that is absolutely not true. Let me show you what's happening out here in the field. This is happening, that's happening, this is happening, that's happening, this is happening. And all of that is money towards your space. And then the last thing, before I ask you this last question, is, we have got to find a way to be able to frame our language in a way that is still supportive of what is transpiring today with black women, without black women feeling like, because we're talking about black men, we don't care about black women. And I think that we are articulate enough to be able to make that argument and not have others frame that argument for us. Because to your point, it's happening across the board, but it is more detrimental to our people because we are struggling for crumbs. Right? It's not the mass amount of money and funding philanthropically that black people are getting that's causing the problem. It's that our piece is so small, it feels like we are in a tug of war with each other, and none of us are winning, including our children. And we got to figure out what that looks like. So, what in 5 years do you expect the Black Man Can to be?
It's a wonderful question. When I have a vision board, I have a notebook where I write stuff down, and I was like, I'd love for the Black Man Can to become a heritage brand. Like when you say Fathers Incorporated, when you say Urban League, when you say NAACP, then you're like, oh, you're the Black Man Can. Like it's in that same vein. And, you know, I've kind of decided like what that looks like, you know, and not trying to duplicate efforts, but what are areas that we can focus on. So like we have our juvenile justice work, but what we do specifically is we actually go into the facilities and work with the young men in those facilities around SEL and entrepreneurship, from ones who have committed very serious and violent crimes to the ones who are in there for, you know, nonviolent crimes, right? And working with them. Then there's our K through 12 work, but specifically with our K through 12 work, we're working on grades 3 through 5, right? So like, there's lots of there's lots of organizations out there. People primarily focus on middle school and high school, but we want to do that prevention work. That 3 through 5, third grade is when almost everywhere in the country you start taking state tests. It's when we start deprioritizing social emotional skills in favor of academic skills. But we can't do that. That's like the perfect time to actually reinvest and double down on social emotional skill development between 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And then the media side in terms of content creation, amplification, and events and programs that allow us to tell our story. And so thinking about that, building the organization around those kind of 3 pillars and moving it forward so that everybody in the world is familiar with the work of the Black Man Can, which again that means you become familiar with the work of everybody. Because from a website perspective, a media side, we might be the largest one focused solely on Black men and boys, which gives us the opportunity to tell everybody else's story and make sure that people know, like, yeah, we got some programs. We can get some funding to keep our programs going. We can do that, great. But the media side, what happens when TheBlackManCan.com looks just like Essence, right? In terms of like, oh, you want to know what Black men are doing? Oh, like you can go there now, but I want it to even be more robust, where it's like, wow, look at all the things that Black men are doing, right? Because we do need a hub where all our amazing stories and the things that Black men are doing in the world, we do need a place where that exists. Just like that's what makes Essence so special. Like if you want to know how amazing Black women are, there's a lot of places you go, but you know the first place you're gonna go.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna do something, you're like, hey, is Essence at the table? How we might be involved in Essence? Can we get them to cover this? Right? Mm-hmm. Like we want that. Even watching the Democratic National Convention, and it's more. I'm working on my bandwidth and funding, but like there's so many different amazing Black male highlights from that, right? And so like if you look at Essence, you look at Black Girls Rock, they're all like top 5 Black women moments at DNC, and that's true. But like, there's like, oh, with Wes Moore's speech, like I know what it's like to be handcuffed, but I'm also now the governor of Maryland, right? Like that's that clip right there, the exonerated 5. Like, listen, this man on the other side wanted to say put us under the jail, right? And boom, that was a powerful moment. Obviously, Barack Obama and what he shared, powerful moment. D.L. Hughley, when he got up there and was like, listen, like if you want to talk about what it looks like to see a Black man apologize and for a Black man to support Black women and stand up and stand in the gap, that's a perfect example. Like boom, got it right there. But now it's like me trying to find the content, and like it's like if I had like just a little bit of a team, it's like, all right, go get these 5 clips, make the little graphic, and then now we post it, and it's like look how Black men are showing up. And we need spaces like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could talk a little more about that too, because there's some relationships and some things that are moving. And again, I think that some of this is we need to start walking in the doors together as opposed to separately, and bringing broader bandwidth together into spaces, so that we can make the argument for those things to happen, and then collaborating on philanthropic proposals, right? And so walking in and saying, this is what we're thinking. You know, someday I have to tell you about my meeting that I had with Arthur Blank when I first came to Atlanta. I learned a lot from that meeting on how to ask for what I really want and not to ask for what I think they want to give me. That's a huge difference in the two of those.
I want to hear that. I'll fly to Atlanta just to have that meeting with you. So you know what I'm saying? Like,
so it was crazy, bro. You know? But I learned a lot from that. Listen, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you and how they can support you.
Yeah, you can come to www.TheBlackManCan.com. You can also follow me, Dr. Brandon Frame, on social media. You can follow TheBlackManCan on social media. We got different events, different things we got coming up. So please, tap in with us. Again, our whole mission and purpose is to amplify, create programs, events, content that showcases what Black men and boys can do.
Dr. Brandon Frame, y'all. This brother is killing the game, man. I am a fan. You need to know that. Even if you don't know, I'm a low-level stalker. I follow you. I follow what you're doing. I know what you're up to. If there's anything that I could ever can do for you or with you, you know that I'm only a cell phone call away to bring everything that I have in my bucket to pour into whatever you need in your bucket. Because at the end of the day, I always tell people that just because my organization is called Fathers Incorporated, just because Dr. Frame's organization is called TheBlackManCan, does not mean that we don't care about children, and it does not mean we don't care about women. In fact, it's the reason we do what we do, because we do care about those two things, and community and family. But it's important that we find spaces to build our men so that they can be everything that they desire to be in their lives. So I thank you for everything that you're doing out there in the space. And to my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you so much for listening to another episode. Our good friend Dr. Brandon Frame with TheBlackManCan. Listen, as the young folks say, Google the brother. He's gonna pop up everywhere. He's on the first. When you put Black man, his organization probably pops up on the first 5 pages, and so you're gonna find what he's doing out there in the world. You know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, always said to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, God bless and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.